Hello, I'm Jordan, and today I'm going to be talking about Measure for Measure by Shakespeare. So to kick things off, I wanted to mention that Tom of Tom LA Books has a video up as of I think yesterday. It's a discussion video with Dan Christian and Jennifer Brooks, I think, and it's of course about Dante and the Divine Comedy, and it's a fantastic video. I highly recommend you go check it out. I'll leave a link down below. But it was a very interesting discussion to watch with this play on my mind, because one thing that really comes across in that discussion is how Dante can provide uh, just a sense of meaning to life and to the world. Um, and it got me thinking that Shakespeare, as much as I love him and as much as he does not provide meaning, I think. In fact, one of the few things I think we can confidently guess about Shakespeare's outlook is that he was a nihilist. And nowhere is that more apparent in what are called the problem plays, which are the three last comedies he wrote, unless you count the late romances. And Measure for Measure is the last of those three. And it is ambiguous, to say the least. I would argue that it's about the kind of arbitrary nature of law and authority and perhaps even morality. So really briefly, what it's about is it's about a duke of I believe it's in Vienna. I'm not exactly sure. Who leaves town in order to kind of judge how things will be governed in his absence. And the person he leaves in charge, Angelo, is renowned for being very scrupulous and kind of morally upright. And no sooner is he left in charge, but he condemns a young man named Claudio to death for impregnating a woman out of wedlock. And Claudio's sister, who was a novitiate, I think it's called, she's training to become a nun, comes to Angelo in order to plead for her brother's life. And over the course of a couple very, very beautiful and upsetting scenes, Angelo agrees to spare Claudio on the condition that Isabella will have sex with him. So that's kind of the general premise. And if that doesn't sound like a comedy to you, then that's understandable. This is not a particularly funny play. It has moments, for sure. But the common thing is that comedies end in marriages and tragedies end in deaths. Um, this play does end in marriages, but not in any kind of satisfying way, because the Duke, who represents true authority and morality and just civilized society, I guess you could say, law and order, has actually returned to town in the disguise of a friar in order to judge how things are going. And in a final grand scene of just sweeping judgments and forgiveness and punishments, he ends the play by doling out marriages to the various characters, which is kind of a funny, charming idea in theory, but the way it's done in practice, especially after what comes after in the play, which is a very dark psychological play of manipulation and death. There's a lot of death, or at least the threat of death hangs over a lot of this play. So the Duke's final judgments are not at all satisfying, I think intentionally. For example, Angelo, who was essentially a sexual predator, is given the punishment of marrying a woman that he abandoned earlier in life. And Isabella, who, remember, was planning on becoming a nun, he just commands to marry himself. So it's ambiguous to say the least. It's not quite as upsetting and blatantly nihilistic as I had remembered it being. Like, I think there is a way to read this play where the Duke does satisfy the conflicts of the play and does, provide a happy ending. I think it is certainly an ambiguous happy ending, especially since the Duke we're not given any reason to believe that he is particularly morally upright himself. Um, why does he lie so much in order to enact this grand theatrical gesture of reconciliation and punishment and forgiveness at the very end? He could have solved it much earlier. And I don't buy that it's just for dramatic effect. I think Shakespeare could have done it otherwise. And furthermore, some of the Duke's speeches are quite dark, to say the least. For example, when he's disguised as a friar, he takes upon himself the job. I'm not sure how he finds the authority to do this, but he takes upon himself the job of giving last rites and comforts to people who are condemned to die. And one of the speeches he gives to Claudio, who is condemned to die at the moment, mind you, is a speech that's designed to make him love life less and be more okay with death. And it is extremely dark and nihilistic, coming from a person that we're supposed to admire as the moral center of authority of the play. So I'm going to read you the speech. It's a little long, but I think it'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Reason thus with life. If I do lose thee, I do lose a thing that none but fools would keep. A breath thou art, servile to all the skyey influences that dost this habitation where thou keep'st hourly afflict. Merely thou art death's fool. For him thou labourest by thy flight to shun, and yet run'st toward him still. Thou art not noble, for all the accommodations that thou bearest are nursed by baseness. Thou art by no means valiant, for thou dost fear the soft and tender fork of a poor worm. Thy best of rest is sleep, and that thou oft provokest, yet grossly fearest thy death, which is no more. Thou art not thyself, for thou exist on many a thousand grains that issue out of dust. Happy thou art not, for what thou hast not still thou strivest to get, and what thou hast forgettest. Thou art not certain, for thy complexion shifts to strange effects after the moon. If thou art rich, thou art poor, for like an ass whose back with ingots bows, thou bearest thy heavy riches but a journey, and death unloads thee. Friend hast thou none, for thine own bowels, which do call thee sire, the mere effusion of thy proper loins, do curse the gout, serpigo, and the rheum for ending thee no sooner. Thou hast nor youth nor age, but, as it were, an after-dinner sleep, dreaming on both, for all thy blessed youth becomes as aged, and doth beg the alms of palsied eld, and when thou art old and rich, thou hast neither heat, affection, limb, nor beauty, to make thy riches pleasant. What's yet in this that bears the name of life? Yet in this life lie hid mo thousand deaths, yet death we fear, that makes these odds all even. So that's pretty heavy. That could have come out of Hamlet. And this is coming from the Duke, who was supposed to be, like I said, the moral center of the play. So at the very least, this is like I said, an ambiguous play. I will say that the poetry in it is stunning, beautiful, and the characters are largely quite interesting. Even Angelo, the sexual predator, has some great moments. And Isabella is unbelievably articulate. She spends most of the play pleading for one thing or another, even though sometimes she has to be goaded into it. But when she does, it's stunning. There's many scenes of very, very tense psychological drama in here, and there are even some funny scenes, despite what it may seem like. It is a funny play. I would call it a comedy more than a tragedy for sure. But yeah, overall, I liked it more than I thought I would reading it a second time. It's not quite as bleak and hopeless and cynical as I had thought it was, but it's still a play that I think reflects a very uncertain outlook on authority in particular, and perhaps morality in general. And it's a very sour note for Shakespeare to go out on as a comedy writer. He went on to write his great tragedies after this, and then, of course, his late romances, which I think could perhaps be his best period. But yeah, this is how he said goodbye to comedies, was with this dark, dark play. So anyways, if you have read Measure for Measure, let me know what you think. It's a great play. I highly recommend reading it if you haven't, and thanks for watching. Have a good day.